Welcome back. It is 10:53, and I'd like to welcome our panelists for panel one, who are Jonathan Maxwell, the Chief Executive of Sustainable Development Capital, and Ian Smith, who's the Head of Green Financial Systems within the EBRD, to turn on their cameras and to join me up here on this virtual stage. So Ian, I see you. We seem to have momentarily lost Jonathan. Jonathan, if you by any chance are here but can't be seen, okay, I think perhaps what we better do is while Claudia, Claudia from VM takes a look to see where Jonathan is, perhaps what we can do is just reverse the order of these presentations, Ian, with you going first, and then while you're speaking, we'll try and find out what's happened to Jonathan.
Thank you, with great pleasure. So my name is Ian Smith, and I'm head of the EBRD's Green Financial Systems team, covering the EBRD countries of the European Union, the Western Balkans, and Eastern Europe. Now, my role is to help the financial sector integrate the policies and practices that mitigate climate change risks and deliver a more sustainable outlook for future generations. Now, I've been representing the EBRD on the EEFIG working group to address how the energy efficiency first principle can be embedded within investment and lending decisions of financial institutions. So I'd like to present today just a little bit about the EBRD practices. So perhaps we can go on to the first slide. But I know that most of you know, but just to outline what the EBRD is, who we are. So sometimes there is confusion because of the European Bank, and this is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So it is owned by 71 different countries. So certainly with the European Union countries and the European Commission and the European Investment Bank being the majority of the shareholders, but it does comprise of many other countries, and therefore we have a very diverse view of how we operate. So what do we do? We bring particular support or input to investment projects which are not available from commercial sources of finance. So we have this additionality concept built into our foundation. We work to ensure that the economies in the regions where we operate are either competitive, inclusive, well-governed, green, resilient, or integrated. Now, these are qualities that we call transition qualities, and every single one of our projects must address some of these qualities, otherwise we will not finance it. Now, we invest to build up effective market economies, and that's the most important part. Is it's across the continents of Central Asia through to Central and Southeast Europe, and the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean and Turkey. And importantly, we follow sound banking. So we focus on private sector investments, and we support policy reform guided by the need to promote sustainable development. On to the next slide. I think it is important to really, let's say, to understand that since the EBRD was founded in 1991, it has operated, and these are the founding operating principles. It has operated around the thematic areas of climate-related risk and opportunity. Now, these areas have been recently outlined by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. But it is important to outline that the way a bank can operate following these principles does really help to put energy efficiency first. So in terms of our governance, one of the founding principles is that we must preserve and improve the environment. it is one of the key features of a modern, well-functioning market economy, and it's part of what the EBRD was set up to promote. In terms of strategy, the EBRD has consistently promoted green economy transition, and since 2006, we have produced 5 4-year strategies specifically focusing on energy efficiency, sustainable financing, and green economy transition. And most recently, our latest financial institutions strategy has put green investment at the front, at the most important aspect of what we're doing with the financial sector. Now, furthermore, we are leaders in climate finance. All of our activities will be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement from the end of this year, and we plan to be a majority green bank by 2025, and our investment portfolio shows that we are on track to be doing that. Now, the other 2 aspects which really help us to put energy efficiency first, one is risk management, and we've heard quite a lot about risk management this morning already, and sound banking absolutely pulls in risk management. We really do look at the risks and rewards for all parties, including the environmental costs and benefits. And it is an absolutely critical part of how to expand competitive markets and make stronger institutional and legal frameworks through policy engagement as well as investment. And the last aspect, which is linked to the areas of TCFD, is metrics and targets. Now, every project that we look at is screened for environmental and social impact. We do monitor the projects throughout the investment or the project life cycle, and we have developed specific tools to make sure that the delivery of our investments do meet these criteria, with tools such as the Green Technology Selector, data management tools, and e-learning systems there. So the EBRD's experience is that the application of the TCFD framework, so that's actually having the principles embedded into operations, has been very helpful in putting energy efficiency first. Now, to go into a little bit more detail of how we do this, I'm going to show the next slide, which is a set of criteria that we put together. So in the center, you see that we have project eligibility, and this is always the point of discussion, is what is an eligible energy efficiency project? Is it really energy efficient? How do we know? So we have a selection process. We have the fundamental environmental and social policy. So these are our environmental safeguards, let's say. We have our, and let's say the safeguards are really part of the risk mitigation process. We have our green economy transition principles. These are part of the opportunities areas to help us promote this. And we have a whole selection of internationally recognized principles and practices which we put into the mix to make sure that we are consistent with what would be considered green finance or energy efficient finance. So these include methodologies that the multilateral development banks have been working on, and we constantly work on these and update them. Every year we publish the revised methodologies for climate finance. We also have working groups on greenhouse gas accounting, and we include other very well recognized criteria such as the green bond principles, among many others. To actually understand how we decide the eligibility, we also look at what the baseline scenario is. And I think we've heard this from some of the speakers today. We have to see what the existing standard is before we can really understand, are we making enough of a difference? And we focus very much on the best available techniques and internationally recognized standards of good practice and environmental performance. Now, we also have produced quite some time ago, I think from probably 2006 when we started doing this, our own internal Handbook. So we call it a Green Economy Transition Handbook. It's something which we update annually. It reflects all of those aspects in terms of the reference methodologies, so the joint MDB methodologies. It links the EU taxonomy, EU energy labeling and eco-design legislation, national requirements, industry standards and best practices when there are not already internationally recognized reference methodologies. So this handbook is something which really guides us as EBRD in the eligibility, and it's something which we have made public in the past, and we will make the latest version public in the next few weeks. So I'll be able to provide links to that once it's become available. So energy efficiency it's a moving target, and the EBRD aligns with reference methodologies and recognize good practice to track energy efficiency finance with market integrity. It's absolutely important that there is no indication that there could be any level of greenwashing here. So lastly, perhaps let me just move on to how this actually fits into the EBRD's process. So on the next slide here. So what we do is we make sure that all of this eligibility and discussion fits into the operation cycle of the projects we do. So it's not a surprise at the end, just as we're about to provide financing, that there are suddenly additional requirements or things that we need to do. So even at the very beginning, as the projects are being thought about, we have, and most banks have this, we have a committee which will just go through to make sure that the projects that we're proposing meet the criteria, meet our lending criteria. Now, this is the first opportunity that we have to actually understand a little bit more about the project and see whether there is a sufficient case for energy efficiency financing. Sometimes there is, sometimes it needs to be explained a little bit better, sometimes there isn't, but we are missing opportunities. So during this early, what we call concept review stage, that is where we can start to attribute energy efficiency and also add value by actually looking at some of the market opportunities where we could actually improve the investment and make it deliver on the energy efficiency side a little bit better. As we move through to the next stage, which is our structure review, by that time we have a lot more information about the project, and our teams, our banking teams, our climate strategy and delivery team, and our environmental and sustainability team, we all work together to make that investment the best it possibly can be, working together with the client just to make sure not only are the risks being mitigated, but the opportunities are not being left behind. Once we get to our final stages, we absolutely have justified why this financing may be considered energy efficient or green. We have assessed the impact that it will have. We have made sure that we have included all the safeguards, both environmental and climate risk, and we have introduced as many of the risk mitigants as we deem appropriate for that type of investment. So overall, that leads to the projects that we finance being, well, having a high level of integrity, and it's something which we're very proud of at the EBRD, and it has absolutely helped us in reaching our green targets, where last year we already financed 50% of our business having green investments linked to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. We'll come back to the topic of energy efficiency first principle, which I should have said at the start is the work which both your organization and Jonathan's are helping us lead with sub-working groups in the expectation of presenting at the end of this year a report which describes how to apply the energy efficiency first principle inside of financial institutions, which of course we know EBRD does. So without further ado, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us from the United States of America. I know the time difference there and the technical issues prevented you from speaking first. I understand you're now with us. If you're able to speak and to switch on your camera, that would be excellent. Jonathan Maxwell.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter, and apologies for the technical difficulties out here in America. So great to meet and to be invited to speak today. I'm going to make my remarks short, Peter, because there's also some risk of background noise where I am. But just to introduce myself, Jonathan Maxwell, I run a company called Sustainable Development Capital. And for well over a decade now, we have been developing and investing in energy efficiency projects. Today, we manage just over $2 billion of capital aimed or invested in energy efficiency projects. Our portfolio is connected to about 50,000 buildings now around the world, about half of which are here in America, in the United States, about half of which are in Europe or the UK. I think just as a before I get into the details of what's in our portfolios, I think just from a finance group perspective, it might be helpful to describe where the capital comes from and how it's formed for investment, because we have found, as an institution, we have found that we have been able to create specialist investment vehicles for investment in these energy efficiency projects, which have quite distinct characteristics. Energy efficiency projects typically have a 10 to 15, maybe 20-year maturity. They can be structured as availability style infrastructure projects, so they can lend themselves to delivering stable, predictable returns, which of course is what the capital market is looking for, both in the public and the private capital market. But also they can be structured to help create levels of certainty, cost cutting, carbon emission reductions, and improved reliability of energy services for the end customer. So, this really, for us over the last 10 or 15 years, in trying to establish a scalable model for investment in energy efficiency, has been the critical factor. How to marry the requirements of institutional investors like ourselves and the investors behind us on the one hand, with the opportunity for the certainty that we're looking for to be delivered to the end customer. So just if I start on the capital side of it and then just spend a couple of minutes on the client side. On the capital side of it, we've established specific investment vehicles to target specific stages of a project development life cycle. I think that's important to say because different types of capital, whether it's debt or equity, look for different types of risk return. And we have been careful to align our capital with the risk return stages of these projects. So as an example, we listed on the main market of the London Stock Exchange in December 2018, an investment company which predominantly focuses on investing in operational energy efficiency projects. It was the first vehicle of its kind to create that kind of liquidity in the secondary market, or scale of liquidity in the secondary market for energy efficiency projects. It's got about half of its portfolio in on-site generation, noting comments made earlier about district energy and on-site generation being really an important part of the solution. It's also got about a very substantial proportion of its portfolio in pure demand reduction projects, things like lighting, heating, ventilation, air conditioning as a service. And then it has some projects inside of it that focus on efficient distribution of energy, particularly where energy is needed a little further away from where it's produced. So, efficient supply. We have a number, whether it's in our district energy assets or in our, distribution networks, like Stockholm's biogas grid. put it into context, that public company listed on the London Stock Exchange now has an equity market capitalization of 1.2 billion pounds. It has another 350 million pounds worth of debt. So in all, over 1.5 billion pounds of investments in that portfolio. And as I say, focused on operational phase. And that enables us from a financial structure perspective to focus our investments in projects which are established, certainly areas for improvement, expansion of capacity, refinement and improvement of performance, but fundamentally delivering levels of cash flow that support a dividend payable to financial investors. So I'm starting on the capital market side, but that's been a breakthrough for us, which is marrying the type of investment that can be made with the returns for investors and providing levels of stability and predictability. That is harder to do when you're building a new project. So if you have a major industrial facility, again, noting the comments made earlier about the scale of the opportunity and the problem in the industrial sector, steel, cement, chemicals, and plastics being responsible, almost for as much greenhouse gas emissions as the power sector. Energy efficiency opportunities are huge in the industrial sector, but they can take longer to design and build. Them changing light bulbs inside a building, for example. So what we've done is have to marry up that opportunity and the risk reward associated with retrofitting an industrial facility, building on-site generation, and so on for industrials. Marry the risk reward associated with that with the type of capital, that will have the appropriate time and cost associated with it. So alongside our public company focused on operational assets, we have a private investment vehicle which focuses on investing in development and construction phase. That's a very important, I think, point to make. Greenfield, can and very often is more efficiently financed through private capital markets even than public markets. And then finally, we have an investment company based here where I am physically today, in New York, which actually focuses on finding opportunities with energy services companies, products and supply chain into the energy efficiency markets, which according to the International Renewable Energy Agency are bigger than the renewable energy market. And the International Renewable Energy Agency says that renewables are going to need 1 or 2 trillion a year globally. They actually say energy efficiency, maybe twice the size of the renewable energy market. So that's the financing side. Coming on to the client side, why are we so interested in the energy efficiency market? And coming back to that point, don't necessarily want to preach to the converted. 70% of all energy is used in buildings, industry, and transport. That's where the significant opportunity behind the grid, going directly to the customer is. And our investments, your investments, can cut costs, improve carbon performance, and critically today reduce energy insecurity, improve the reliability of supply. And the technologies are available. Everybody on today's screen knows that the on-site generation, the distribution, and the demand reduction technologies, can be implemented within the next 12 to 36 months, which I think is a very different time frame, Peter, to the time frame during which we can, find new gas, build new nukes, and introduce new renewable power at scale. There is nothing else that within the next 12 to 36 months can make such a fundamental difference to Europe's energy security. The last point I will make is that everybody is asking how to replace the 40% of Europe's gas that was relied on from Russia. And it's an important, critically important question. I actually think there's an even more important question, which is how we can stop wasting the 2/3 of the energy in Europe that's lost from the point of generation through thermal losses, and then through the transmission and distribution losses, even before it gets to buildings. Here in the United States, it's 70% of energy is lost. And then when it gets to buildings, to congratulate the European Commission's renovation wave, which we want to be part of, the private capital coming in to support, when the energy gets to the buildings, how it isn't yet wasted still. So, in our experience, and it's only 55,000 properties internationally, but there is some good data inside of that. our clients have been wasting 10 to 20% of the energy inside of the buildings at least. So if you add it up, the age-old complaint was, yes, we need new renewable power, we need new clean energy, but we must stop wasting energy. We may only need 25 to 35% of the energy we use. And on that note, Peter, thank you for the privilege of participating today.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we need you to conserve your voice and your energy, because we need more investors like you to bring energy efficiency forward through all the vehicles and the activities that you're doing. Just to give you a quick rest to recover, maybe have a glass of water there. I think there's a couple of questions to Ian that have come in. Ian, which are these? You introduced the EBRD as having operational principles since its foundation that are aligned with the thematic areas of the task force on the climate-related financial disclosures. Have those principles changed over time? And how hard would it be for an organization to introduce your operating principles if they didn't already have them? That was question one. And question two is, you explained the process that EBRD follows to determine eligibility and to attribute finance energy efficiency projects. Is attribution always clear, or sometimes are there disagreements?
Okay, thank you. So when the EBRD was founded just over 30 years ago, the operating principles really focused on safeguards. So it focused on the risk management, on the sound banking, on the environmental compliance. So very much looking at how to avoid risk. Where we didn't really have the full set of tools was on the strategies, on how to take advantage of some of the areas, and particularly when we first started, energy efficiency was the absolute key area in the countries that we were investing in. And so we fairly quickly moved from trying to take an opportunistic approach to energy efficiency to actually developing strategies. And I mentioned we've now developed, I think, five 4-year strategies over the last years. And these really help us to focus all of our staff, but focus the way that we promote the investments, and also introduce targets. And targets is something which, when the EBRD was founded, we didn't have clear targets in terms of how much energy efficiency financing we should do. It was clearly a large part of what we did, but there was no target. So introducing those and making sure that those targets had the resources in order to deliver them. So the staff resources, the intellectual resources, the processes, in terms of making the finance get to those energy efficiency investments. So it has changed over time, but the safeguards still there, probably better than they were at the very beginning, but the safeguards are there, the principles are there, and I would say it's really the opportunities that we have developed over time. And if I was looking at an organization who didn't already have these principles, I think, particularly over the last few years, it just makes business sense. And if you don't have these principles, it's very difficult to operate. Firstly, on the risk management side. So I think more and more financial institutions are understanding that they need to have a much better grasp on the climate-related risks. But that's only one side of the equation. And I think that whilst I see quite a few financial institutions developing those risk management tools and understanding a little bit more about what's in their portfolio, who their clients are, what their business models are, the opportunity side, I think, is where the next big push needs to be, and that is developing the strategies. So we've heard from some of the speakers today that many do have strategies, but really helping to understand what those opportunities are and putting the resources behind it. And I think I've heard from many times staff of a very small department saying, we're responsible for the green or the energy efficiency or the ESG. These teams need to be staffed up. These are the key people to delivering the energy efficiency finance and for putting energy efficiency first. You asked also about how we determine the eligibility And is it always clear? Or are there disagreements? Well, I mean, it's mostly clear, but as I said, the energy efficiency is a moving target. We do align with the reference methodologies, recognize good practice, so that we can track our finance with market integrity. But there is, or there always will be, a small proportion of investments where there's a wider debate. And I think the areas that we tend to have a debate on are linked to the project boundaries. And sometimes it goes beyond that. It's starting to look at perhaps the supply chains. Are we by helping one company, are we then kind of locking in less sustainable practices in other companies or through the supply chain? So we are very aware of trying to make a positive impact for everyone who's involved or everyone who is affected by these investments. And perhaps the other area where we have, I wouldn't say disagreements, but where we have a debate is on some of the more innovative technologies. Are they really going to deliver? Are these technologies mature enough? Is there perhaps a risk that even though these might be great technologies, perhaps they will not be somehow maintained in the market, or that somehow we will be financing something which becomes obsolete sooner rather than later? But these are healthy discussions to have. They're brought through our committees. A lot of people put their views forward, and at the end of the day, we have a consensus. And if we don't have a consensus, we don't finance it. It's as simple as that. So yes, it is tricky, but I think in most cases it's clear. Let's put it that way. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. I mean, so Ian, you in your last response did mention targets, and Jonathan, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to ask to you, but Ian, feel free to prepare an answer also. The first one is this. Within the residential mortgage sector, there is obviously a net zero goal that can be achieved through decarbonisation of supply as well as the reduction of demand. Should mortgage portfolio standards, but obviously that's for lending institutions, but for investors, do you include minimum targets for energy consumption per square meter per annum for different types of buildings in your analysis? And should we have those types of sort of very concrete intensity targets by sector potentially? And then there's another question for you to think about, which is, as you think about making recommendations to other investors as to how they should put energy efficiency first, which is this principle which you and the EBRD follow, but that maybe other investors do not or don't even know how to do it, what would you say that the kind of key crucial steps are?
Great. Well, can I'll just try and sort of hit both. They're big questions, Peter, but I'll try and sort of hit them both on their head succinctly. Minimum standards, I completely agree with I think the question that Colin asked there, which was around setting frameworks. Yes, in the residential sector, I think the idea of energy per square meter, I think very high level though, this is a much bigger issue. Residential buildings is a very important part, the 40% of energy that's used in buildings, but it's not all of it. Commercial industrial, well, commercial buildings are a very substantial part. Let's say it's half to 2/3 even in certain economies. That means that 70% of the energy is being used in public buildings and commercial and industrial facilities. So to bring it up one level, my response to that would be yes, but also apply standards at national level. The most efficient, I mean, this is going to be a little controversial, but the most effective standards from an energy consumption standards level that I've ever seen were introduced first in China in 2006 under the 11th five-year plan, and they said they wanted to reduce energy consumption by 4% a year every year for the first 5 years. That's what transformed that marketplace, because people knew that they had to hit these energy consumption per unit of GDP output. Actually, I think we're absolutely there now, Peter. I think that we need to look at that at state level, national level, and translate that into the marketplace through passing those standards down in the appropriate way. They can be passed down in different ways. First of all, into public sector, completely echo or recognize the comments made earlier that actually public sector has to lead. If the National Health Services, if the Ministry of Defence, Education are wasting enormous amounts of energy, it's very difficult, actually, let alone the opportunity cost. It's also very difficult to pass that into the private sector or to advocate for it. However, in the private sector, investors have, I think, come a long way, Peter, on standards in the finance sector. We've got TCFD, we've got SFDR. A lot of people are very worried about reporting. We're very worried about doing. So if you're a company and you're wasting energy, yes, these standards should start to actually disclose that, not just your carbon and your ESG claims, targets, net zero, and so on, but they should actually show what shareholders are losing, Peter, in terms of money, as well as greenhouse gas. I'm going to move on to the other question because I know time is limited. But in terms of the opportunity, I think there are three things. Yeah, I think the question was, what are the three most impactful things that you can do, if I paraphrase, to put energy efficiency first on the agenda of a financial institution? I've just talked about government. I think time's gone. We have to regulate for this now. But from a financial institution, how do you get them to care? Okay, three major ways. As an example, one is get them to see the other side of the coin. The entire marketplace has been dominated, quite rightly and brilliantly, by renewable power. I mean, for the last 20 years, we've had the modern era of renewable power, wind, solar, centralized energy systems, which are fantastic. But we all know the challenges associated with the fact that 80% of the world's energy system is oil, gas, and coal. So we can double, triple, quadruple down on renewables, but it's not going to get us to where we need to by 2025 peak emissions or by 2030. Energy efficiency can. So getting people to see the other side of the coin, why it's so important. And also from a financial institution perspective, they love this. Why it's largely overlooked, if compared to other parts of the energy sector. Therefore, there's a very substantial, large total addressable market and a substantial opportunity. That's the first point. I think the second point is actually articulating the benefits. The fact that energy efficiency, whether it's on-site generation, demand reduction, can be cheaper than business as usual. The largest and cleanest source of greenhouse gas emission reductions. And that it can improve the reliability of supply, what we're now calling energy security. That is really interesting and important to financial investors. They're long-term thinkers. They're at risk 10, 15, 20 years. And then I think the third point, I think, is about risk. Now, track record helps. Everything I'm saying today, candidly, I was saying 10, 12 years ago. Peter, we've known each other for 15 years at least. The tune hasn't changed, but what has helped a lot is now being able to point to enormous numbers of case studies of effective delivery in every sector of the economy, from public sector buildings to industrial, commercial, even in the transport sector. It's unequivocal proof that delivering these projects is good for the client because it reduces cost, carbon, improves resilience, and creates sustainable investment returns. So track record helps. But allied to that, last point I make is on the third point on track record, is actually that's how you articulate the other side of the coin. Investors want to see risk return, but they also want risk mitigation. So explaining to investors, this is the third point, how risks can be mitigated in the energy efficiency sector through contracting, with the energy service supply chain, whether it's ESCOs or EPC and O&M contractors, and how those risks of engaging with clients, can be mitigated through an effective industrial technical consortium. I've got my own last one to put out there, which is as an observation, Peter. The biggest thing that public sector can do, I think, on the revenue side of the equation, is looking at credit guarantees. That is why this is harder to do in the commercial and industrial sector, because investors, coming back to the question about how to make them think, need security of their return, and they also need risk mitigation. So credit is a really interesting area. There have been some fantastic examples of credit and risk mitigation techniques that have been introduced by multilaterals. So that's a bit of my bandwagon. And I also echo Eric Usher's point earlier today that project development and technical assistance, I think, is one of the key factors. And again, incredibly excited about the renovation wave and what kind of support it can give to them.
Brilliant, Jonathan. I really appreciate your energy and also your detailed responses. I think to close the panel, we'll just pass the baton one more time to you, Ian, because I want to hear if EBRD has targets and metrics which are energy intensity and how you use them internally in sectors, and if you do.
Yes, we go beyond targets and metrics on energy intensity, and what we're actually looking at now is low carbon pathways. So we're looking at really how we can transform different sectors, how we can help some of the most energy intensive sectors to transform over time. These are the very carbon intensive ones like cement, steel, fertilizers, but also buildings and even down to small businesses. How can we help them to set out on a pathway? Because they can't invest overnight. You can't just suddenly say, we're not going to finance these because they're energy intensive or carbon intensive. So we're working with them for strategies. Some of these are sort of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, even some of them are much longer. But how can we transform those sectors? And how can we make sure that the investment that we give is consistent with these pathways? So that's what we're doing. We're going beyond just the simple metrics of energy intensity, because as I've said a number of times now, it's a moving target. What is energy intensive today, or what is energy efficient today may become energy intensive tomorrow. So it's really about how to help them on that journey and how to make sure that we provide them, and not just we, other financiers can also provide them support on their journeys on that pathway.
Ian, can I just support that I mean wholeheartedly. The project development and the project design and the process to create these projects is very different from mainstream utility or even renewable energy type of investing. We use the word energy, but it's actually a very different process, going through assessing the problem, coming up with solutions, getting the best available technology, and then contracting it appropriately. It's a very substantial, very specialist discipline. It can be done. It's immensely effective, but I completely agree with your point there. This is really the fundamental piece. These projects need a system of design which then create the opportunity.
Brilliant. I really like it when the public and the private sector are in such strong agreement. Jonathan and Ian, you've both done a fantastic job coming to this panel. Thank you to both your organizations for contributing to the work on placing energy efficiency first for financial institutions, which will complete its report this year. And that report will be reviewed by the larger working group, and it will be published later on this year. So everybody should look out for that. And for those of you who felt cheated by the fact that this panel didn't precisely define the exact rules which energy efficiency first principle is required to be implemented, don't worry, that report will have exactly that in it. So what you've heard today is just a teaser for the kinds of activities which we are documenting. But thank you both, and we will now invite the second group of panelists to join us here on stage. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just as we see the cameras coming on,